Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning! Welcome to another edition of Know Your Units, this time for a unit that I really should have covered a long time ago. And that's going to be the Berserker. For whatever reason, every time that I tried to record this one, I ran into technical issues, so that's all well and fine. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on here. So the Berserker is a class that typically tends to get praised early on in the game, and then typically has a tendency to be seen as obsolete by the time you get into the post-game and all of that kind of thing, generally due to range kind of stuff, but I wanted to go and throw out a few features of the class here that maybe potentially might be getting slept on, so let's go ahead and get started here. As always, let's go ahead and start off with the skills. So you've got your typically standard layout of a few different weapons here. Fists are going to be their primary ideal, like, kind of ranged option here. Basically a combination of Swift Foot as well as the ranged finishers on a fist, especially Howling Rage there, is actually going to give them a pretty surprising amount of reach. Daggers also will basically be your long-range defensive option with something like a Heart Crusher. Again, it's a little bit surprising how far this can actually get into things. Axes are going to be solid as far as having a ice counter and all of that kind of thing. Hammers are going to be solid for an AoE, and then cudgels are funny. It's kind of odd to see cudgels here. So basically this was a joke option back on the PSP, and there really isn't a whole lot of reason for you to ever put a cudgel on a Berserker this time around, seeing as they've had their role shifted primarily to being a range kind of an increaser type of deal. In this particular case, you might be able to get a slightly faster stun bonk through a combination of Berserk and Vigorous Attack, though in almost every circumstance there's very little reason that you'd necessarily want to go for something like this, other than, you know, kind of a meme build. They've got max rank of Constitution, as well as Insight, if you need to keep those finishers coming. But one of their interesting new features this time around is going to be Pincer 4. This basically means that they have effectively an automatic equivalent of the sneak attack skill that the Rogue used to have back in PSP. Now, that particular thing I've been argued on a few times, but just to be very clear, it gives a 50% bonus. Back attack also gave a 50% bonus. It's almost like that's the same number or something. Anyway, so as far as Pincer goes, this is going to be one of their more unique things, giving them a 50% damage bonus when they trigger their Pincer. Everyone else just gets their 100%. These guys just get a full 150% if they trigger a Pincer here, meaning that if you have their Sanguine, you have their Berserk, and you get the additional 50% from this. God forbid you add a Breach or Elemental bonus to that particular equation. They are the single hardest hitting melee unit in the game, barring something like a Slayer skill setup. Anyway, that said, they've got Steadfast for those later map areas. They've got Siege. In their particular case, they don't have access to any of the Swiftfoot 2 items, but Siege could still potentially be useful for something like Berserk. Typically, Berserkers won't usually be running around that often, so this means that occasionally Siege may actually be pretty solid to keep around for them. Resist Petrify, Resist Charm in their usual states here, and then you have Berserk, Sanguine, and Risk Management. So the uses for all these are going to depend entirely on what you're looking for. In the case of Berserk, this is going to give you a, I believe it was roughly 30% damage bonus, while also allowing you to hit in an arc in front of you. Whereas something like Sanguine Assault will increase your strength score by 50%. Now, this isn't a attack bonus. This isn't a essentially a full whatever calculation type of bonus. In this case, it is directly the strength stat, which is kind of unusual, but what the hell, why not? Anyway, it basically translates to the same thing as attack anyway in this particular case, allowing you to more or less bypass defenses you wouldn't otherwise be able to bypass. So through a combination of Berserk and Sanguine, they can easily, absolutely crush anything from start to finish. And additionally, it should be noted that while they do have a little bit of, occasionally they'll have a little bit of catch-up time on some of the bigger maps, they will still, I mean, they'll basically just turn into a meat grinder as soon as they get close. That said, you also have something like Risk Management if you want to make sure that all of the damage is split around the entire party. If you'd like to see a fantastic use case for how this can potentially be insanely overpowered, go ahead and look at the final boss of the game and how many people got filtered by that thing. Anyway, let's continue on. So they've actually got a few weird options. Like the Berserker is kind of one of those cases where they've got a lot of sort of half access to very specific things. Like, for example, this time around, I wanted to have Donalto fully trained as a Berserker with very little in the way of casting stats, though surprisingly, his starting stats still kept his intelligence and mind more or less tied for his stats this time around, even though his full training was as a Berserker. So that's kind of interesting. Anyway, so yeah, they're not going to get in like insanely good numbers or anything off of their casting abilities, but they do have access to a lot of weapons that'll essentially allow them to throw some spells out there to go finish stuff off. This isn't in every single type of situation, but I just want to point out this is more or less the equivalent of, if you ever played Into the Breach, basically this is the equivalent of the artillery units, where it's just basically going to be that little tap exactly where you need it. It doesn't have to be that impressive. Sometimes all you need is that little tap. So this basically gives a wide splash of different tap abilities available. And additionally, just to point this out, they also have access to a pretty solid suite of debuff weapons here as well. Again, my personal favorite, I've mentioned this a lot, is going to be the Dragon Fang. Since it doesn't have counterattack attached to it like the claws do, this basically means that they'll be able to apply those elemental damage bonuses to this weapon. They'll be able to use their Berserks, they'll be able to use their Sanguines, and they don't have to worry about accidentally putting it in the wrong place. So for example, if we switch out his Constitution over here for the Sanguine here, essentially he has this stuff set up, he sits behind something, and there you go, 50% damage bonus, elemental damage bonus, potentially throw a breach in there, all of that kind of stuff. It is absolutely wonderful. I should point out that I actually have Denim over here running a build to hopefully show how nutty some of those things can go. Now that I think about it, I probably should be going for a Breach Spear on him. I was going to show a kind of Fall Strike setup here, but this actually works just fine. So essentially, I want to say that one of the solid pairings, two of the solid pairings that you really should consider with a Berserker, because they really are a team player more so than, they are basically a battering ram that you throw into the mix, but they pair exceptionally well with things like basic soldiers as well as Terror Knights. So we're just going to have Denim kind of acting as both here. Vigorous Attack means that when they're hitting those Berserks with something like a Dragon Fang or a Kappa Gnaw or anything like that, that's essentially going to be potentially up to 7 units instantly poisoned as well as heavily damaged. Something like Lament will basically shred off defenses. Again, combining this with all their other bonuses, this can be a very funny bonus to attach here, especially Terror Knight running the Zwei combo combined with a Berserker on the other side is a fantastic way to see something's damage just exponentially increase to a degree that is practically, well, it's just comical. I'm sure if you've seen it before, you've seen it before. But again, Berserkers are one of those ones that will essentially scale out of control very quickly, but they have to hit the right situation. Like many melee units, they will have decent, but not exactly earth-shattering, kind of standard damage. However, through a combination of Sanguine as well as Berserk, they more or less can get a similar bonus to the Elemental/Breach combo, while kind of attacking in a neutral sense, but as soon as you start applying all of those, as with every other multiplier bonus in this game, it just starts stacking exponentially. So anyways, we're going to go ahead and get that Vigorous applied to everybody, and he's just going to go ahead and start clearing off some of the undead stuff here. Like I said, he's just kind of a general purpose support thing. This is something I probably should have done earlier to better emphasize some of the teamwork elements between some of the other classes, and something that I will be doing for other kind of know your unit stuff going forward. But yeah, when it comes to the Berserker, this is a unit that you really want to apply in many ways similarly to the Archer there, where you want to be applying them in situations where you've kind of started applying some kind of a defense break, because again, they scale exponentially as soon as they can, as soon as they find those openings. Also, just to point this out, like I mentioned earlier, when it comes to those fist weapons, if you're looking for a solid general-purpose Berserker type of setup, fists, especially with something like the Kappa Gnaw there, you have a situation where you can set up those pincers as well as those Berserks while kind of actively attacking with their finishers. So something like Howling Rage can essentially hit from 3 tiles away, which means that they have pretty solid access with a movement boost to be able to hit things at reasonably long range. So they will still be able to be a threat there, but you can focus on positioning them just like you would something like a Knight, Terror Knight, all of that kind of thing. They're basically a more offensive version of a positioning unit, which makes them, interestingly enough, a sort of a specialist in both frontal assaults as well as ambushes. So they're very flexible in that way. They're a bit of a wrecking ball. They seem kind of basic, but overall their use is a bit more technical than it first seems. Since, if they just run up and directly hit something, it might work, but if they end up getting themselves some good positioning, it might work a hell of a lot better. And in many cases, it actually is not a terrible idea to go for something like that knife combo that I mentioned, and simply set them on AI, because they will do a very good job of putting them into prime positions to exploit pincers. The AI is specifically programmed to be aware of good pincer locations, and many times they may potentially set themselves up in ways that we may not realize. Like, for example, if a unit has counterattack, in many cases they will park themselves next to counterattack units, specifically so that when you attack that counterattack unit, they'll be there on the other side, ready to pincer in, Additionally, just to point this out, as far as those bonuses go, if you were to pair them up with a spear unit, it should be reminded that finishers will also trigger pincer, so something like a spear going in for that scythe there will essentially cause breach. They come in, they get their 50% bonus on top of a different 50% bonus. So that's just generally a type of bonuses, well, a type of bonus that you just don't see stacked on melee that often outside of Slayer stuff. But, Slayer stuff is basically just kind of a spectacle thing. This is a bit more practical. As far as their long range, like if you wanted to go full hybrid with them type options, they can rock builds that will essentially take advantage of all those of every card at the same time. If you're looking through the full pile there, physical cards are pretty obvious. Magic cards, there's several items like the pinion blade, the talons, all of that kind of thing, that will allow you to give them pretty solid casting abilities, just due to the fact that you can actually get a lot more out of the magic cards than the magic stats in many cases. This means that combined with a crit card can see them easily kind of keeping up pace with your actual dedicated casters if need be. Something like crit cards in general combine very well with their other bonuses already, for very obvious reasons. Like that right there. This is essentially, oh yeah, she's a dedicated caster, that's why she just punched for an 800. But yeah, wide variety of different weapons here. If you are looking to run several of them, just kind of off in the background, it is worth paying attention to just kind of swapping out for different elements. Again, as a constant reminder, if you're looking to kind of keep damage consistent with your melee units, just have them running different types of weapons so that you always have a finisher that can take advantage of whatever weakness the enemy team is currently sitting with. If you run everybody as the same element and hope to have one particular element to just sort of beat everything else, it'll more or less be the equivalent of like a 5-year-old going and playing Pokemon for the first time and then wondering why their Pikachu couldn't kill everything. Very strong on the mind, as recently I've been trying to get that concept across to my daughter, who has been constantly insisting that her Pikachu is just too fast to die. But anyway, either way, so that's kind of about it for Berserkers. You want to position them behind stuff to get those big bonuses. You want to ideally be attacking with their finishers and setting up with their other moves. Ideally, you want to be picking up some physical cards with them, though if you want to save those for your beast units to get more out of them, they can still perform just fine with debuff weapons and finishers. Their damage is generally going to be in the range of either competent to one-shot kill level, depending on how well you set them up. But they're a unit that's just really fun to use. They're not going to be earth-shattering right from the get-go, but as the fight keeps going, they will keep putting on that pressure. And they will pair very well with many different types of units. Like we mentioned earlier, we have those basic soldiers guaranteeing debuffs on their weapons. We have things like the Terenius that are able to set up with them, generally just keeping a cleric in the backfield to keep them running, and they actually pair exceptionally well with a cleric if running risk management. Similar to the Knight, risk management will essentially be a reverse of Guardian Force, allowing you to spread out damage across multiple units. Now, this is still technically the same damage being done, however, in this case, because it's spread out, this means something like a major heal can actually give you a far more efficient heal across multiple units, and you don't have to worry about one unit in particular getting sniped down. So again, it depends on the team, but if you are running that ability, just make sure to remember to keep a major heal on your cleric there. It will be very handy. Yeah, that's kind of about it for this one. More or less sums them up. Oh, it's actually probably worth noting. Keep a generally you want to keep an exorcism juice on your berserkers. It's just generally a good practice I've found over time. This AI team doesn't have it. I keep forgetting to add it on them. But generally, you want to keep at least one exorcism juice on your complete dedicated frontliners. You never know when everybody else is overwhelmed, and you just want to have them step in to sort out that job, because a pesky undead in your in your front line there. Like, if you needed a full 4 healing items, you're doing something wrong already. But that does give them a solid option for something to do there. Personally, I like running one revive item, one healing item, one buff or debuff item, and then one exorcism for a lot of the dedicated frontliners there. But yeah, that's kind of about that. So y'all have yourselves a good one. Let me know what kind of fun stuff you've got there. I mean, personally, my favorite Berserker setup is still the Donalto, like, god slapping setup over here. It was one of the very few cases where I got a maxed out relic weapon, and of all things, it just happened to be the frickin' raise. So I considered, you know what, he's just there to go Jesus slap some people. It seems like something he would do. All right, y'all have yourselves a good one. Don't forget to keep a dodge item on these guys, and you'll definitely see their performance going quite a bit. Like, of the many things as far as the buff and debuff argument, would really say that I would love to have the option to let them use all of their dodge buff items. But, you gotta manually put those in, but that's fine. Anyway, y'all have yourselves a good one, take care, and I'll stop trying to end this video like 14 times in a row. Have a good one.